Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll just give it a minute or so to allow people to join. My name is Laura. I'm a senior content writer at Charity Digital, and I'll be your host throughout today's webinar session. And would love to give you all a very warm welcome. So yes, thank you for joining us. Please do introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. Um, Firstly, a quick introduction to Charity Digital. We are a registered UK charity, and our mission is to help other charities increase their impact by being more digital. Today's session is called Moving Beyond Us and Them, Othering in Action, and will be delivered by Letesia Gibson, founder and program leader at behaviour change consultancy New Ways. In this session, we're going to learn a clearer understanding of what othering is, how to recognise subtle forms of othering in our organisations, and practical approaches to interrupt othering and replace it with curiosity. Just before we start, I want to share a few house rules and pointers for today's session. The session is being recorded and will be uploaded to watch on demand within a week's time. Any slides that are shared together with any resources will also be made available to you, so don't worry if you've missed anything. And closed captions are available for today's session. To enable these, in the bottom of the Zoom window, click the up arrow next to the closed caption and then show subtitle. During the webinar, please ask lots of questions in the Q&A section, which is located on the Zoom menu bar, and Letesia can address these at the end of the presentation. If someone asks a question that really resonates with you, you can also upvote it. So just click on the thumbs up icon and this will upvote it automatically. And finally, if you encounter any sound or image issues, please let us know in the chat and we'll do our very best to get things back to normal as soon as we can. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and let me hand over to Letesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and hello, everybody. I can't see you, and you can see me, so I'm going to imagine that I've got a sea of smiling, willing, interested faces. So if you don't know me, I run an organization called New Ways, and we are a behavior change consultancy that works on organizational development, leadership development, and cultural work, particularly anything that relates to belonging, equity, power, anti-racism, inclusion, navigating change. We work on all of those different spaces with a lot of organizations in the third sector too. So thanks for welcoming me here today. So today we're going to be talking about this concept of othering and belonging, more particularly the othering part of it. And I'm going to just share a little bit of the wider context as to kind of why this session is designed in the way it is and what you can sort of expect of this next sort of 40 minutes of us kind of going through this journey together. I'll just come to my next slide. Oh yeah, done that one. So what we're kind of going through today is actually a bit of an experience of a chapter of one of a program that we've put together that kind of brings together all of our thinking and learning. We've been going for 6 years. We've been working in so many different organizations. We've run so many programs around these topics that we have put it together in a kind of self-paced journey called More Than Words, Practice Anti-Racism in Times of Division. And we decided that we wanted to kind of pull out one of the modules in this program to give us an experience of that together. And if it feels like it's something that's of interest to you, then you can come and talk to us about the whole program. So this is kind of the 8 modules in the program, but actually the thing that we're going to focus on today is how we other each other. And I wanted to just give you that kind of context because it sort of sets the scene of like what to expect of how we're going to learn today and how we're going to explore these topics together. Because this kind of learning and unlearning really isn't something that's delivered by just me giving you information and education and you jotting down some notes and going away and say, great, that's wonderful. It tends to come when we have a bit more of a reflective moment to think about, actually, what behaviors am I doing that might be reinforcing othering? What can I notice about my own habits and tendencies? I wonder if I could be a bit challenging to myself about where I might actually be othering different people. And so that kind of, and then obviously from that, sort of stepping into taking that reflective observations and actually trying out practice in some different ways. So today we're not going to get into the practice in different ways. We're going to get into some of the observations that we might be able to do together. And so there's an element of today that's a little bit interactive, and I use that word very lightly because obviously we're all kind of dialing in individually. But there's a few things I'm going to ask as questions about in the chat. There's a few moments where I'm going to make pauses so that we can actually just take a moment to take in what's been shared, and I've got some questions for you that you might want to kind of have a bit of paper or a notepad nearby to scribble on and just have a moment to use this time to learn in a little bit more of an engaged way. So I know often in these sort of webinar formats, I've done it myself, you might be listening to something in the background and actually you're also doing your emails. This might be one where it would be nice to be in it and kind of present and connected. So that's the kind of the journey that we're going on. I wanted to just maybe start this kind of introduction to this topic around us and them and the idea of othering, of telling you a little bit of a story of like how I came to be connected to this and why it became such a kind of central feature in the work that I'm doing. Because obviously we're living in a time at the moment where there is a lot of polarization. And it's something, ironically, here we're being hosted by Charity Digital, thinking about the role of digital actually in enhancing and amplifying some of that sense of us and them as more and more people are in their kind of digital bubbles or their kind of media bubbles. And you've probably seen the more in common work around Broken Britain, which talks about there being seven different segments of people in society that have different worldviews, different value systems, different beliefs driving them. So there is a lot of kind of division and polarization. So that feels like really true for now. And I think that's only something that we're going to see more and more of as we're already seeing it kind of starting to really take pace and probably showing up in some of the worlds that you are all working in. But I got first introduced to this idea of othering when I attended a conference in Berlin on the 20th, I think it was about 20th of October, 2023. So, and the conference was about othering and belonging. There's actually an American institute that do a lot of research and thinking about that. So, but that timing was very poignant because I think it was like just about 2 weeks after the 7th of October tragedy that the world kind of woke up to. So just such a moment to be talking about othering and belonging, and actually the whole kind of conference itself was a very meaningful experience because of how that kind of us and them that we were all kind of in the globe kind of looking at was very very prominent. But John Powell, who's the president of that organization, shared a slide that said, othering is the biggest problem we've got to solve in the 21st century. And it has really sort of stayed with me in thinking about all of the work we do around equity and inclusion and belonging. And I really knew from that moment that there was something more I wanted to do in terms of kind of bringing that into the work and bringing this idea more out into organizations and make it a live thing that we all think about because we all have tendencies to be in the us and create a them. And so that isn't just about the work of EDI, that actually is just part of like society and organizational life. And that's what we're going to look at today and start to think about. So I'll take you on to what we're going to be looking at today. So I'm going to take us through a little bit more of an understanding of belonging and how othering fractures it. We're going to explore 6 breaking behaviors that lead to othering in small and big ways. And we're going to make a bridging commitment. And I will tell you a little bit more about bridging in a moment. So let's begin. So I thought we could start by really sort of grounding ourselves in thinking about what actually is belonging, because I think sometimes it's a word that gets used a lot, and it's quite a small word for a huge, big, important impact in our lives and our communities and our organizations. So, if you're comfortable, I'd like to just take a moment to do a little exercise with me to help us begin this webinar and this journey of reflection together. And I'd like you to, and I'm not going to ask you to share moments of belonging or not belonging, but we are going to explore together what those two different states feel like. And I would like you to share that, but let me guide you through it. So, the first thing I'd like us to do is just to maybe take a seat, take a sit back in your chair, and just maybe you might want to close your eyes from where you are. And I'd like you to try and land on a moment in your life that you felt you really belonged. You might have been with a group of people, could have been family, work, another kind of group or community that you're involved with. It might have been a recent thing, could have been something this week, last year. And I want you just to notice what feels possible when you're in a moment like that, where you feel sure that you belong. So take a moment to think about that. And let's sort of imagine we're taking a snapshot of that moment. And then I'd like us to then come back and think then this time about a moment when we didn't belong. Maybe that doesn't feel so certain. You might feel very sure, yes, I feel very much like I didn't belong there, or it might just be this kind of sense of, I'm just not really sure, like how I'm being received here. And I'd like you to just think for a moment and notice in that moment what feels hard when you're in that state of not belonging. So, yeah, kind of come to a close of that. Like, I'd love you to share any answers in the chat. Like, yeah, maybe firstly, what feels possible when you feel like you belong? Yeah, some great reflections here already coming into the chat. Um, this idea of everything feeling possible, a sense of being at ease and calm, relaxed, trusted, safe, being your authentic self. Yeah, feeling heard, that we understand each other. Yeah, it's such an important part of belonging is, really understanding just actually how much it links to safety, performance, how much of us we can bring, how connected we feel, and therefore how we can work together, come together around challenges. It feels really essential to those things. And just reading through these comments, like, yeah, just what happened, when we move on to thinking about when we don't belong, and if you've got more things to share, do go ahead. Yeah, it's like questioning. We tend to question. We feel very much on the outside, and we spend a lot of our energy figuring out, like, how can I be here? How should I be here? It can make us feel, yeah, very insecure. And it can also feel like we really can't speak about expressing our true selves. So I think it feels helpful to start kind of thinking about belonging first before we move into othering, because I think, yeah, I wanted to just connect us to the kind of the richness of what this state really is about. And so one of the things that I do talk a lot about and see often in our work is just acknowledging that belonging is a choice. It's something that we have to engage to create it. So belonging doesn't just happen to us. There's part of us that is being willing to step into a group or an organization or a community to say, yeah, I'm actually going to be willing to kind of, participate here. And there's a choice to be made about, are we making this a space or a place where people can step into and feel that this is a space for them? And that choice is a kind of a big part, thinking about this idea of choice feels very important in the concept of othering, which I'll come on to talk a little bit more about in a moment. But let's just be with belonging for a moment longer. So thinking about that kind of the idea of belonging being as a choice. Expanding the circle of concern is the definition of belonging that we work with, which is really more than being included or being invited or having access. It really means that we are really seeing a wider range of people as having voice and the power to help shape the structures that affect their lives. So there's an agency and a right to be there, a sense that this is a space that they are not only accepted in, but valued in, and that we're kind of all equal in that space. And that is a kind of a different sense of belonging that sometimes is talked about. You know, I often think people confuse kind of inclusion with belonging. Actually, this belonging about voice, rights, participation feels like the kind of the level of belonging that we really are talking about here. The other thing that feels really important to talk about in the context of belonging is that belonging is not about feeling comfortable. Oh, I'm with my people and therefore I'm in the comfort zone. And people do talk about that often. And that obviously is one experience of belonging. But I think the belonging that we're talking about in terms of community and participation and valuing difference is really about belonging as an act of courage and really seeing that belonging isn't, is really needing the willingness to stay in relationship when things are awkward, when things are uncomfortable, when they're uncertain. Like it actually asks us to be present, to stay present, to listen deeply, and to keep that circle open, even when tensions rise. And I think this is where we are seeing a lot of the challenge because, othering happens when people feel under threat. So when we feel under threat, it's natural to kind of only want to be with people who are like us and talk like us and think like us. And actually, it needs quite a bit of courage to be able to work across difference and still be in, to maintain that kind of expanding of the circle of concern. So I just think that's kind of quite helpful to think about when we think about belonging, because I think those two things often get missed. And so let's talk a little bit more about what othering is. So othering is the production or perpetuation of an us versus them. And as I mentioned, it's something that gets stronger when we feel threatened. And, we only have to look into the world right now to see just how many threats are real or perceived, but in a way, our bodies don't really know any difference. So people are feeling threatened or fearful, or anxious. And those are the moments when us and them get much stronger. I mean, even without the world outside, we can look inside any of our organizations, and whenever there's a moment of change, we start to see more fractures in teams or leadership versus the rest of the organization because that sense of fear or concern has gotten stronger, and there is a need to kind of feel, to feel safe, I guess, in some way. What it does, though, is it fractures relationships and coalitions and communities, and it creates distance. It kind of, deliberately says, "You're not one of us. You're over there. Somehow you are separate to us." So it really thinks a lot about separation. Othering doesn't make us bad people. We all do it. And so what I wanted to do in this webinar was really help us think about the ways that we do it in kind of maybe seen and lesser seen ways, because it does get in the way of true belonging and connection. And I do believe that the work that we are all doing in terms of solving problems in society, building, moving towards social change, trying to bring people around movements that we're wanting to see move forward, requires us to get really good at this, because we need all of us to solve and make progress. Maybe this is something I'd love to ask of you, like just thinking about the things that I've just shared there, like in your worlds of work or community, where do you see us and them dynamics? I'm just going to introduce a few here that feel maybe things that we've worked on or seen recently. I'm doing quite a bit of work at the moment with the sustainable food movement, and this is definitely one of the divides they talk about. Veganism versus meat eaters. We see it in terms of the anybody working in climate change, who is the enemy and which side am I on? We see it in, this is obviously one we've seen quite a lot in our cities up and down the UK. The cyclists and how they other the drivers, maybe especially the black cab drivers. And there are so many ways in which we do this in our everyday lives. And sometimes part of the othering is about reinforcing our sense of belonging to a group, which is not always so healthy because it really, it might kind of strengthen or reinforce a sense of identity to a group. But what it does is it starts to shut down and close the door on possibilities of dialogue, of understanding, of empathy, of working together, of finding new solutions. So I'd be really curious if you feel like popping into the chat any us and them dynamics that maybe you've noticed in your spaces, because I think that's something that would be just really helpful to gather because there are lots of them. So yeah, so that's sort of kind of introducing us to that idea. And then what I wanted to kind of move on to was really speaking about actually what are these breaking behaviors and to spend a little bit of time thinking about them. So I'm going to introduce us to these six, and I'm sure there are more, but these six feel particularly kind of like dominant in what we've observed. They are different ways of saying, you don't belong, you're not one of them. And I believe that our work is to notice our habits and to start to practice the move towards, to kind of move back to connection and an openness for relationship. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a whistle stop tour here, just explaining these six. And then we're going to spend a little bit more time on each of these six. And I invite you as I go into the deep dive of each, or I'll say a light dive, should we say, of each of them, to jot down some thoughts about like maybe how you notice this othering dynamic in you or in the spaces that you're working and living in. And I'll pause and give a little bit of space for you to have a little bit of time to write some things down. No need to share that. So, you can if you want, but there's no need to. When we come at the end of this little section, we will kind of introduce a poll to let us think about which of these feels like the one that you're most resonating with and the ones that feel most important for us to think about as a sector. Yes, and thank you to those that are starting to introduce your us and them reflections. Yes, do keep kind of those coming. So I'm going to start with these and a brief introduction, and then we'll do a deep dive. So the first breaking behavior is assume and define. So this is this line, I already know who you are. So I've already decided who you are. So that's the assuming and defining. The second one is, I point my finger with this one, naming, shaming, and blaming. You're the problem. It's all about you. I'm going to just focus on you, and I'm going to make it very difficult for there to be any kind of reconnection from that point. So I guess that's a little bit like cancel culture. Three, safety and solidarity. Your pain isn't worth my discomfort. So it's a trade-off we make about who and what we stand up for. The fourth one is there's one truth, there's one story. My story is the right story. There's only one story. The fifth one is moral superiority. You're bad and I am good. So really having this binary thinking. And then the final one is erased, cancelled, completely excluded from concern or care. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about these with the next slide. But what I wanted to just say before I do that is these can be expressed really subtly. So I've just given, exaggerated, more animated, and maybe more, maybe feeling a little bit crueler way of speaking about othering. But it can really happen. Sometimes that is even really noticing in very subtle little ways or things that we do or say. And so, yeah, do just hold that in your mind as we kind of go through exploring these, because I think, yeah, we might find that more often we're in that more subtle space and we haven't really noticed that. And I think that's actually some of the space where it's easiest to start to make some changes. So the first one, I already know who you are, it almost could say, I think. Um, and I think this is a really interesting one, and I suspect many of us can recognize ourselves here. We make assumptions about a person's identity based on one aspect of their identity. So we make assumptions about a group or person based on one aspect of our identity. So we either see something about them and we decide that's all they are, or we see they do a small thing and we make it bigger and we say that's everything they are. And what that does is it means that we don't allow space for views or ideas that don't fit our stereotype of them. So we are really kind of closing down the possibility for that person or that group to show us more about themselves or to show us something different because we've already decided which box they go in, and it's quite hard for that person or group to kind of break out of that box. And that's actually the work, I think, of kind of overcoming that. And I think I did an exercise recently in a workshop just last week, actually, where I was doing a workshop on assumptions for a group, and I showed four images, and it was just really interesting just how many assumptions came up about these four different people just based on their appearance. Um, and the more the conversation kind of went on, because at the start people were trying very hard to not like do the obvious thing, you started to see some of the kind of, underneath things that were there. And yeah, we all do it. And, stereotypes are part of what help us like move through life. We couldn't possibly take on all the information about a person for the first time. So stereotypes do help us, but it's when they sort of become hardened into facts. We could imagine that this person reading the Telegraph reader, maybe you've got some assumptions about Telegraph readers, but what about if we discover that this person featured here is, married to a black woman, actually is a carer who needs to be in a corporate environment to pay for that care for that family member, actually came from a working class family, and is the first one of their family to own their own home. And so, climbing up the ladder is a really important thing to them. Like, would we imagine that story from just that, or make space for that kind of story of that person? So just kind of very quickly just pull that together. I'm sure there's other ways that we can think about this, but it's the idea of like making space to allow for expansion, allow to be challenged, allow and make space to question those assumptions that we might have of others. So I guess my question to you is, when have you reduced somebody to a type instead of seeing their full story? So I'll move on to the next one. Name, blame, shame. You are the problem. So, again, I think I'm going to say it's on everyone. We've all done this. Um, we point to we want to label somebody as the problem. Um, whether that's a bad leader or an out of touch team or unrealistic funders or the government or whoever, an individual. Um, and instead of really like looking at them in the context of a system. So I'm coming back to kind of the sustainable food movement because I've ran this with them recently, and like one of the things that really came up there was, the way that like people's poor food choices, even that, is the focus as opposed to, looking at poverty and the way that supermarkets market and price things, the challenge of access to different kinds of produce and the price points of organic choices. So what we do is we just kind of focus on that one little bit rather than kind of expanding out to this bigger narrative that often is connected to systems and really trying to understand those systems rather than focusing on the person or the thing that's the symptom of it. And again, this is there's a that maybe we get like a I don't know like a dopamine hit or a boost of confidence or whether it kind of heightens an identity to the things that we care about. But what it does is it means that we don't we just close down the opportunity for understanding or connection or curiosity, asking questions because we become so sure and righteous that you're the problem and I'm not going to make any space for it. So that kind of idea of blaming actually also stops us looking at like us and maybe the role that we might play as an individual, as a group in any given situation. And ultimately, it just closes that space for any dialogue or anything new to emerge. So this one feels really important to kind of wrestle with. So maybe this is a question to you, like where does blame shut down progress in the work that you do? I'd like to leave you with that. So I'll come on to the third one. This one feels really important to, well, always, but I think particularly now, I feel I hear a lot of stories about this, stories, accounts about this at the moment. And it's this idea of comfort, my comfort matters more than your pain. So the theme of this one is safety over solidarity. And it's, when someone is harmed or excluded, we tend to stay silent or avoid conflict, avoid saying something or making it a thing. So we might placate, we might delay talking about it or showing solidarity or privately agree, but we don't use our role, relationships, or process to change what's happening. And I think this is an interesting one because this might not obviously kind of feel like an othering because probably we feel that we are in solidarity with different groups and different in different moments. But the inaction is the thing that indicates, communicates to those that were seeking solidarity from others that they are an outsider, that they are put in this other group, which is not as important as the group that I need to not offend, not upset, not do anything risky with, or not make uncomfortable. And that prioritizing is the thing that makes it feel like othering. So I think we probably all have got to do some soul searching around this in different moments. Yeah, when do I or our organizations choose comfort over care, and what does that protect? And I do feel this is a form of othering that is going to become more and more important. I feel like through my work, I hear a lot of side conversations about, yeah, impacts of organizations not speaking up about Palestine, about what's happening with the rise of the right, what's happening with reform and the kind of concern about what might be coming. And so, yeah, I feel like there's going to be more for us to be doing and thinking about in this space. Just pause for a moment there. So, the fourth one story, one truth. And this is like the idea of my story is right. And this really comes from like worldviews, I think. And we are seeing a lot of this at the moment where people are coming at issues from very different worldviews and are very kind of sure that their story or their perspective is the truth. And it's a very difficult one. Just watched a video earlier online that said, we've got some people that are talking about that are arguing at a point from legality and others that are arguing from a point of morality. And they're both really strong on their perspectives. They're just not actually speaking the same language. So, yeah, like this one, I think is probably an important one for anybody working in the space of cohesion or with a broad range of different people and communities that we're trying to connect with and really recognizing that actually they might be looking at the truth or describing or feeling what the truth is in very different ways. Yeah, like almost like in two different worlds. And so what that can mean is that, othering can occur when we don't make space to see that there are these other worldviews and ways of seeing, and we lead and operate very much only from the one that we're holding. And what that can also mean is that complex realities just get reduced. There's no room for kind of other perspectives that are maybe political, maybe come from an emotional base, sorry, come from a lived experience base, come from a different way of understanding what's happening in society at the moment. And so, yeah, it can become a space where one story or perspective is really erased and one is just taken as fact. So I think this phrase, multiple truths, feels very important for this one. And like this example on the side about, veganism is the only way, and that just being kind of a truth. That's the only way we're going to save our food system. We're going to kind of be doing good for our planet and really arriving at a more consciously lived world, and that being the only way that's possible. And that being, yeah, just like that, just not really helping us move forward when we actually have different kinds of needs to consider within that. And yeah, so something about getting more comfortable with multiple truths here that feels important. So I wonder if there's something to reflect on in terms of like, where, in what situations do you think maybe your own experience or narrative is, center stage, and in doing that, it's not making space for there to be other ones. Yeah. So I'll move on to the fifth one. Um, I think we see this a lot in the liberal left, if I'm completely honest, and maybe there's something about some soul searching around that, I think, as a sector. There's a moral superiority of I'm in the good space and others are in the bad space or the wrong space. So it's this is sometimes where other organizations, communities, groups, or movements are framed as careless or ignorant or wrong or unwilling. Like they are in the group that is that are not their way isn't the right way of doing things. And that feels like important to pay attention to, because it doesn't really help create space for connection with others. It really, we're already sort of starting out from a place, and maybe if we're honest, we can see some of this in ourselves of like, I kind of know I'm right, and my job is really to kind of get you to think like I think, or to bring you over to my side, rather than maybe shining a light on where might there be things that could look different in the way that we're approaching things and taking more of an introspection and working together to find a third way. So I think that idea of like that assumption that we are right, just right from the off, feels really important. And I think we've seen this with Brexit. We're seeing this actually with reform. I think, like, yeah, it's bad to vote reform. Like, well, have we really understood like why people are doing that? Like I think there really is something about this binary of good and bad that just really isn't helpful when we're trying to come together and collaborate around change. And I actually was in I ran an event for I chaired an event for a client recently, and they had I think the project was called 174. I'll send it out in the links. But it was a guy called Tim who runs a project in Belfast, and he was talking about how he was bridging divides in Belfast, with its history of religious divides, but also now increasingly they have like that actually isn't their main divide. They're seeing lots of other divides around religion and age and class. And the thing that kind of brought everybody together was actually this idea of did you know that Belfast has the highest suicide rate within I don't know if it's an under 30 age bracket. And it was something like that that really kind of helped people kind of come together and think about this differently. So, like the you are bad, I am in the good side, I'm right, you're wrong. the superiority around that. We need to find ways to kind of break through that. And I thought that was a really interesting example. But you should check them out because they have a really interesting approach in how they bring different people from different sides, if you want to put it that way, together to work together around a shared challenge, which they have found to be really effective in shifting these ideas of superiority. Yes, whoever said that, moral superiority can be a real issue in charities. I really do think that is one for us to reckon with. Then finally, this erased or cancelled. So this one is about being excluded from concern. So that idea of expanding the circle of concern can be, yeah, sometimes people just are not even being considered to be part of it at all. And it might be through just ignorance or just they hadn't thought about it or they didn't think that they were relevant or it feels a bit tricky to bring them in. There can be a whole range of reasons as to why people are not there, but they are erased. So whether that's like, intentionally or accidentally, either way, we stop listening and we're making decisions without considering them. So people are being othered. We're othering people by not really even considering them. And so I'm sure we've all had examples of seeing where this has happened in soft and harder ways. So whose voice or experience has become invisible in our work? And maybe that's a question for us to kind of sit with a little bit. So that was a very brief whistle-stop tour around these six breaking behaviors. They're called breaking because they break connection and fracture belonging. Um, and we're going to launch a poll just now, just to get a sense of how some of these have landed with us. And we're going to do two polls. The first one's going to ask you kind of personally, which behaviors do you most recognize in yourself? And the second one is which of these behaviors you most see in the charity sector. So I'll give you just a moment to take a minute to think about that and what that might look like for you. Sorry. Um, so I will let Laura lead on the poll and let us know when that is going to be complete. So interesting. Assume and define. Yes, I thought that one would be and moral superiority. So and a bit of safety and solidarity. Yes, those feel like really interesting areas for I think any of us to be really reflecting on personally. And which of these behaviors you see most in the charity sector? Yes, I think the moral superiority feels like one of the biggest ones. But that's interesting about one story, one truth. And I think that, yeah, that really tallies with, I guess, the work so many people are on in terms of equity and inclusion and belonging to shift that, because I think that's where a lot of that lies. Well, that's it. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your reflections there. I think that's really helpful to see that. So I'll just conclude with before we go into our Q&A with a very brief introduction to bridging. So we have othering, we have belonging, we have othering, and then bridging is the piece that is the response to that. And I think our kind of question, and certainly something that we're going to be doing at New Ways in terms of thinking about support and resources, how do we be better bridges? Because I think that is the thing that we are wanting to really bring into our work around social cohesion, around leadership, around inclusion and belonging. We need more bridges and we need people who have the skills for bridging. And there is obviously an essence about bridging that is about also sensing when do we have to have boundaries and when can we bridge. And there are short bridges and long bridges, and I won't get into all of that today, but there's a whole thing about bridging and how we do that in ways that mean we can hold our values and also be open to connection and dialogue. But John Powell, who is the president of this Othering and Belonging Institute that I'm in love with, and what he kind of concludes on is let's all take the time to be curious about each other. It's not saying we agree with each other. It's not even saying we like each other. It's saying it's basic human dignity to have curiosity, and we're trying to see each other's humanity. And I think the more that we can hold the essence of that, the more we can approach the challenges that lie ahead, because it does feel like it's going to be quite a rocky road. So thank you for coming along and participating. And that's the end of my slides.
Thank you so much, Letitia. That's fascinating. And I think, yeah, definitely something we can all take away and live and breathe by now, I think. We've had a couple of questions in the Q&A. So how can we avoid othering in the context of unequal power dynamics without aligning with those powers at the expense of those with less oppressed groups? It's a big
So
question.
that, yes, let's say that. Can you just say it again? Let me just write it
Yeah,
down.
of course. How can we avoid othering in the context of unequal power dynamics
Yeah.
without aligning with those powers at the expense of those with less or oppressed groups?
Yeah, well, I think that's at the heart of like solidarity, isn't it?
Mm.
That's at the heart of solidarity. And like the thing is, by not there's something about like acknowledging all parts of that equation, right? Like I think what's happening at the moment is that we're saying we're not saying anything. So already we are signaling that we are not in support of those oppressed groups, that we are not in solidarity with them, that they're not in the circle of concern. So just even being in the conversation about, forefronting that I mean, it's a very, very vague question. It's a little bit hard without an example, but like for example, just take, I think, the rise of the far right, like acknowledging that people are actually afraid to leave their homes. That, I mean, I saw someone talk about a webinar the other day about the strategies Asian women are taking in Birmingham right now about when they leave their home and they just go to the gym and, so I think there's something to name that there are groups that are feeling unsafe. And there's something to see that there are other groups that also are feeling excluded. And this is, I think, the challenge that we have. Like, and I don't know if this is where this question comes from. How do we speak to everybody? I don't know if that was kind of what might be underneath it. It is at least beginning to actually acknowledge and name that there are these tensions and just even beginning there. And I
Yeah.
wonder if there's something about feeling like we have to have the answer or feeling like we have to have the end product in like what we put out. That is kind of stopping us from even just bringing that curiosity and humanity in the first instance. So I don't know if that's a bit waffly, but yeah, it's not an easy one to answer.
No, not definitely not. That's great. Thank you. From a storytelling perspective, and I've seen a couple of people mention this in the chat, how hard it is in the charity sector not to have the one truth and not to
Mm.
um be feel morally superior or say more, come across as morally superior. So how do we avoid othering in our storytelling? So how do we tell the whole story, especially when attention spans are so short?
Mm. Well, I think maybe like just understanding firstly, where is the moral superiority coming from?
Yeah.
Where is it in the storytelling? Like, I often see it like coming through like sometimes through a middle class lens.
Hmm.
So it's othering really anybody who's working class because it's just not something, it's not a lens that they kind of relate to. Like, whether that's ideas of like what health is or ideas of like what community is. Like if it's already coming from a point of like a worldview that is like different to other people, like I think there's something about exploring. I mean, those two things I think are quite interesting. Like, what does health mean to people? Like, if you're working in a space of health, if your model is all about the medical model or it's about the absence of illness or disease, and actually in other spaces, health is means something completely different. And that's not kind of featured in the way that we narrate. Like, it's not an easy. So even that question of short attention spans is an interesting one because these are not quick fix questions. These are ones that need some actual soul searching as an organization as to, yeah, where are we reinforcing moral superiority without realizing it? Because we just feel like we're just doing what we would what feels kind of natural to us.
Mhm.
It doesn't feel like superiority, but it's actually received as superiority. So hopefully that maybe gives a bit of thought around that.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much. Um, so we've had another question. I am proud to know that I bridge, but it's dismissed. I know it's difficult, but do you have any key personal thoughts or insights that might help save possible family issues? So if there are, othering going on in the family.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also a bridger, so hey. Um, yeah, and I'd like to come like connect with me because it is something that I do want to do a lot more around, like thinking about bridgers, because I think sometimes like you can be kind of, particularly in family dynamics, that you can be kind of forced into that role in a way because you're the one that's able to do that, and maybe you hold too much. So I think there is something really important for bridgers to think about boundaries like what are your boundaries and know what they are and also kind of like make sure that it's bridging and not rescuing. Like, are we trying to fix problems and solve things, or are we actually coming from this in a space where we're holding our like knowing your own values and knowing what feels yeah, what feels safe as well, like what feels safe and what feels aligned to your values, I think are really important things, because I think bridging is different to mediating. Yeah, bridging is trying to create the space where there's possibility for dialogue and connection, and finding a way that we can come together around something common. Like, so we're a family, so we want to be a family. So,
Mm.
but it isn't about like placating or like, making sure I've listened to everybody. Like, it's not like that kind of role that is about emotionally supporting people. I think it is about like bridging to allow people to participate from where they are, and it needs energy. So yeah, and that's why it's important that allies play roles in different situations as well, right? Because when you feel deeply affected by an issue and you're also trying to play a role of bridger, like it's a lot to hold that, and I think that's maybe where some people are finding it really challenging.
Thank you very much. I think that distinction between mediating and bridging is really important one to note, and definitely somewhere I would have got confused. So that's really helpful. Um, would you like to say anything about physical barriers as a way of othering? For example, where physical difference encounters a physical barrier and where technology can assist while recognizing its limits.
God, these are really long questions. Right, say it again just so I can like properly understand
Um, would
it.
you like to say anything about physical barriers as a way of othering? For example, where a physical difference encounters a physical barrier and whether technology can assist while recognizing its limits.
Yeah, right. So where I might need to know a little bit more about the context of that question, because I feel like what they're saying is like something about like othering as an experience of design. I think that's where it's coming from. Like, yeah. So,
Yeah.
like, okay, service design has, or building design, by the nature of it being designed in an ableist way, has othered people who might have different abilities or different physical requirements. I'm guessing that's where we're at. Yeah, I haven't actually really thought about that. I've been thinking much more about othering being a relational thing, actually. And so I think that's a really interesting question, and it is a way that you can immediately feel othered for sure, and on the outside. So yeah, let's speak a bit more about that, because I'm sure there's a lot of examples of that. And actually, yeah, I guess yeah, something not human about that response. So I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to give that some
Yeah.
thought.
It's definitely a thought. Yeah, it's definitely some food for thought in there, I think. Just from, and we've done a whole digital inclusion campaign, and it's part of it's understanding the technological barriers to how people access websites and things like
Mhm.
that. So I think, yeah, it's how we build that into our services and everything. It's definitely it takes a lot of thought.
Yeah, and so I think there really is something about the human aspect.
Yeah.
So even in a digital sense,
Mm,
like the way that that can be, because I think, belonging is a kind of a being seen.
yeah.
I see you. I value you. I appreciate you. You're included, but your needs have been thought about. So, however technology responds, it cannot just be that the technology just works. I think there's an opportunity for that to be seen as a really intentional, like, you are in this circle of concern moment.
I That's very like thank you so much. That's such a good point. Um so we now have, we've dipped our toes and we've started to understand othering. But it's obviously such a huge topic. There's obviously so much that more that we can learn. What do we do after this webinar?
Well, go away and reflect a little bit, I think would be great. Talk to your colleagues. I think this would be such an interesting conversation to bring back into organizations because I think there's a lot of fear around polarizing right now. But us and them dynamics have existed always, right? So it's something that is quite universally experienced. So I would really invite you to continue on to kind of have that conversation. We'll share the slides with you. There's things that you can go away and reflect on that. I would definitely go and check out the Institute of Othering and Belonging. They do some really interesting civic work, actually. It's mainly based in the US, but they do have a few international projects that are looking at things like the far right and co-opting of different movements. And yeah, super interesting work. Um, Connect with us as well at New Ways. Really would love to be in touch with you. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I mentioned to you at the beginning that this is part of our More Than Words self-guided program. This is like one of the modules in it. So if that feels like something that you want to kind of explore, please do reach out to me on that. And yeah, follow us on our newsletter, I think is also a really good thing to do because we do talk about a lot of these topics all the time. Yeah, but just thanks for coming along. It's been really good to be able to speak about this and really great questions. I think this is something that we don't have all the answers to, and nobody's really an expert in this right now. And I think that's also something to recognize. You saw me sort of fumbling a little bit on some of the answers because these are new things for me to be thinking about, and this is the kind of conversation we need to be in more.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Letitia. I think there's so much we can learn from today's session. And it's been really interesting. Thank you to everyone for attending. We have lots more events coming up, including our AI Summit on the Thursday, the 12th of March, which is in person at the Microsoft offices in London. We'll pop a link to that event in the chat. And finally, if you could share your feedback with us, that would be fantastic. It's really important to us and it helps us to make sure that our webinars are delivering what you guys want. So thank you so much to everyone. And thank you again to Letitia. That was a great session.